Yep, we had a slide crisis, and so we'll just have to deal with it, because some pieces are missing, but I think the slides that we're going to hold the longest on are among us, and we'll make do. So the first thing I have to say is to make a confession. It's this: when I was asked to give a title for this talk, I made it up on the spot. It came from a hunch, or maybe something more like a brain itch about Goya, but I didn't have a clue what I was going to say. I've learned to trust these itches, however, when words suddenly appear, like a gift from your unconscious. And as it turns out, this title, Goya and his Doctor, Narratives in the Body, does mean something, but we'll have to meander a little and not take a direct path to discover what it is. First, I have to say that for a long time I've thought of narrative or stories as physiological, of the body. The linguist Noam Chomsky says we're hardwired for language. I think that goes for stories too. Stories that can take linguistic and pictorial form. Memory itself becomes a narrative of the self, edited by our amnesia and our desires. And identity depends on memory and storytelling that neurological devastations can erase. But aside from conscious memory, there are other narratives inside us always churning away. The peculiar stories of dreams, for example, in which the action can jump suddenly from one setting to another, or a person named in the dream doesn't look anything like the person one knows in waking life. In my dreams, my teeth fall out, I discover wounds on my body and disturbing rashes. Sometimes I mysteriously change sexes. I am often running from robbers, soldiers, or Nazis. I fly. I used to sail high above cities, but now I mostly float downstairs. There's also the bizarre mutations or fragmented narratives of semi-sleep dreams, the visions we see when we lie in bed on the verge of unconsciousness. For me, they are mostly figures and faces, one curious form moving into the next, and they are sometimes horrible. The one I remember best was of the back of a revolving desk chair that slowly turned toward me, and in it was the grotesque figure of a dead man. Hallucinations are another kind of narrative we produce. I suffer from migraines and so have had auras of lights and colors and black spots in my vision. But once I had what I later discovered was called a Lilliputian hallucination. I was lying in bed, looked down at the floor, and there I saw a little pink man and his little pink ox. Once during a high fever, I had another vision. I'm rather embarrassed to say that I looked up from my bed and saw a burning cross, which promptly fell onto my chest and began to eat away at my skin. I use these examples not because they are particularly interesting, but simply to document from my own experience the peculiar sights we all experience normally in sleep or near sleep, and the further oddities of vision that illness may bring upon us. Dreams, semi-sleep dreams, and hallucinations share the fact that they draw their imagery from the world outside us. Freud, whatever one might think of his theories, was certainly right about one thing. Our dreams at night are mostly built from the material of the day before. I'm a little ashamed of my hallucinations. Paul Bunyan and his blue ox babe turned pink, and obviously rooted in my Minnesota childhood and that weird KKK cross experience, but at the very least, these sites demonstrate that the stuff of worldly mythologies may be borrowed by the brain in moments of physical crisis. During his life, Goya suffered 3 major illnesses, 2 of which we know nearly killed him. The first was when he was 31, a fever he contracted in 1777. Speculation has it that it may have been typhoid. The second, in 1792-93, when he suffered a loss of balance, noises in his head, temporary paralysis, and was left permanently deaf. The third illness was in 1819, when he again almost died, but recovered. After that illness, he painted the work that we will see right now, I think. There. He gave it to his physician and friend, Dr. Arietta. The inscription reads this: Goya thankful to his friend Arietta. You know what? I can't see a word on my page. It just, you're going to have to, yeah, okay. For the skill and care with which he saved his life during his short and dangerous illness, endured at the end of 1819 at 73 years of age. He painted it in 1820. Goya lived on until 1828, dying at the age of 82. In order to see anything, I'm going to have... Okay. Everything from syphilis to Meniere's disease have been suggested by the modern doctors who have bothered to speculate on what Goya had. But I'm not interested in naming his illnesses. Suffice it to say that when he wasn't sick, he seems to have been a robust, energetic man with an appetite for good food, fine clothes and things, hunting, and most likely women, although the extent and degree of this passion is unknown. In a 1771 letter to his beloved friend, Martin Zapater, to whom he wrote faithfully until Zapater died in 1803, he refers to their shared dissoluteness. But what that actually means remains obscure. In March of 1793, when Goya was desperately ill, Zapater wrote the following tantalizing sentence to Goya's brother-in-law. Goya, as I told you, has been brought to this by his own thoughtlessness. Clearly, Bayeux knew what Zapater meant, but we don't. What we do know is that 3 times in the artist's life he recovered from near-fatal sickness, and 3 times he rebounded to paint and draw again. Scholars have made much of these illnesses, especially the second, which caused his deafness, because it marked a change in his work. It appeared to unleash a freer and more private art. To some degree, this was simply practical. He was recuperating, and for a number of years after 1792 and his debilitation, he did no commission for the royal family, although he did do some portraits of nobility. He continued to draw and paint, and his letters make clear that his desire to work for himself was strong. In a letter he wrote in 1794 to Don Bernardo de Iriarte, Vice Protector of the Academy of Painting, a letter that was accompanied by 11 small paintings, he articulates his reasons, telling him that he is sending, quote, a set of cabinet pictures in which I have managed to make observations for which there is normally no opportunity in commissioned works, which give no scope for fantasy and invention. This Goya is the one I want to talk about, the uncommissioned Goya after 1793, the deaf Goya, the man who himself said that he wanted to give rein to fantasy and invention. Although there are a number of paintings included in this body of work, the one in front of you for his doctor, the cabinet pictures he mentions in his letter, and of course the black paintings, a huge part of it are drawings and etchings, of which the prints of Los Caprichos are a part. I think it's fair to say that this work shares a focus on the human body as a narrative entity, which is both extremely vulnerable and highly mutable. Its very essence is change. You might say, well, for heaven's sakes, all figurative painters are interested in the body. The body is at the center of Western painting, and lots of those bodies are moving or dying or embracing or doing something. This is true. But in Goya, something else is happening, something rather new, because the nature of the storytelling is a little different. Narrative painting in the West traditionally relied either on multiple panels, didactic medieval painting, for example, that depicted Christ's life or the lives of the saints, or on the visual conventions that allowed the spectator to identify the part of the narrative that he happened to be looking at, the Annunciation, the crucifixion, the deposition, etc., or, well, mythological subjects, like Venus and Cupid. It's instructive to look at a painter like David. We have the David slide next, I think. There we go. Marat's death. Goya's French contemporary, David employed a new narrative, the French Revolution, as a vehicle for storytelling in his painting, turning the events of the present into instant history painting. In sharp contrast to Goya, David's style is heavily codified by neoclassical ideas of how to represent the human body. He took his cues from Alberti, the Renaissance painter, sculptor, architect, and theorist, who encouraged painting from nature, but also argued that copying nature did not guarantee beauty. Beauty required that nature be enhanced. In 1792, the same year that Goya fell ill, David addressed the National Convention and proposed the commission of a funerary monument as well as a medallion to honor the heroic dead of the revolution. This is what he says: "I wish that my proposal to strike medallions be realized for all the glorious and auspicious events of the Republic that have already taken place and will take place. This in imitation of the Greeks and Romans, who through their series of medallions have not only given us knowledge of remarkable events, knowledge of the grand homme, but also of the progress of their arts." For me, this is one of the most beautiful paintings in the world. And, you know, the real painting is so unbelievably luminous that a slide really can't, it just doesn't get close to it. But we certainly can get an idea. The revolutionary slumped in his bathtub after his murder has the most wonderful body. His skin is so smooth, so perfect, and the corpse is illuminated by what seems to be an almost divine light. I think we can confidently say that Marat never, ever looked like this. After Charlotte Corday had finished him off, he couldn't have been so pretty. And I doubt that he slumped over so gracefully with this page still in his hand. And look at that face, this wonderful face. I love this painting. It's very interesting too. You see, David visited Marat the day before he died and had a conversation with that hero of the people while he was in his bath writing an article. But what's more interesting to me is that after Marat's murder, David's job wasn't only to create a painting to commemorate Marat, he was also involved in arranging the funeral and exhibiting the body to the public. Again, speaking to the convention, he said, quote, "We cannot uncover certain parts of his body because, you know, he was leprous and that his blood was diseased. But I thought it would be interesting to offer him in the pose I found him, writing for the happiness of the people." In the end, they didn't prop up the already embalmed corpse in a bathtub or wrench its hands so that it could hold a pen and paper, all for the edification of the people. But David's proposal is nothing short of astounding, because it involves the manipulation of a real dead body in order to turn the corpse itself into a statue, a work of art. Marat was in the bathtub all the time because it relieved his terrible skin disease, one that he had contracted hiding in the sewers of Paris, something which, at the very least, interfered with an ideal vision of a revolutionary martyr, and so had to be hidden. But even by his own lights, David wasn't looking for reality. He is a supreme artist of beautiful, closed bodies. And by closed, I mean if you look at the lines, and again, in the actual painting, the lines are even more highly defined. You see that nice little wound there? It's a nice sensitive wound with a few delicate drops of blood. Very attractive. And so by closed, I mean really, even though there is this little wound here, the lines around the body in the painting are really very, very contained. And some of David's other paintings show that even more. These bodies are essentially manipulated by pre-scripted classical narratives, and achieving this vision necessitates, in fact, demands suppression. The scabrous, oozing disease had to be hidden. The political significance of this is painfully obvious and rich with ironies. Revolutionary France produced David, reactionary Spain produced Goya. In 1792, the same year David was proposing medallions based on classical models, Goya gave an address to the Royal Academy of San Fernando about the methods of teaching the visual arts. In it, he vehemently defends working from nature and not from other paintings, sculptures, or casts. His most revealing statement is this: I will give a proof to demonstrate with facts that there are no rules in painting, and that the oppression or servile obligation of making all study or follow the same path is a great impediment for the young who profess this very difficult art. He then goes on to say, he who wishes to distance himself to correct it, nature, without seeking the best of it, can he help but fall into a reprehensible and monotonous manner? Goya was still working as a tapestry painter in those years for the Royal Tapestry Factory, a job he disliked and resented. But while he was doing it, he allowed himself the liberty of changing its narrative conventions. As Janice Tomlinson points out in her book From El Greco to Goya, quote, until Goya's days, artists had painted cartoons illustrating a series of events from a single story or a common theme, such as the Four Seasons. But Goya rethought this model, choosing as his subject matter contemporary life in 18th century Madrid, and juxtaposing scenes to give us a view that incorporates characters from all classes and even from other regions and countries. In the works he made for himself after 1792 and his sickness, Goya continued to rely on what can only be called universal human narratives, rather than specific codified stories, religious, mythical, or historical. When Goya did use recent history, we have to do the dumbest thing of all now, hold up this famous painting that I'm sure everybody knows. Right? Everybody knows this painting, so I'm just going to hold it in your mind. It would be nice to have a slide, but we don't have it, so we're just going to go on. It's this painting. It's May 3rd, 1808. His approach to a subject matter is radically different from David. The pathos of the canvas relies on the terror and surprise in the eyes of the man who is about to be shot, on the man already killed, his blood staining the ground. We find ourselves in the middle of a story, and even if we know nothing of that day in Spanish history and the uprising against the French, it makes no difference. The tale being told is horribly familiar. There is no glory in it and no idealism. The dead are bleeding profusely. Note the difference. Their bodies are cut and uncontained. Their blood runs together. Goya's brushstroke makes this possible with its use of suggestion rather than any precise definition of edges, those highly defined borders we see in David. David's wish is for immortality. The painting will turn his own moment into glorious history. His need for medallions testifies to this, and he succeeds by turning Marat's body into a beautiful statue of death, not a corpse already marred by disease that will soon decay and rot. There is also the issue of the light in the two paintings. In David, the light beautifies the dead man, illuminating his face, shoulder, and lower arm. In Goya's painting, we witness the bloodshed in the bright light that comes from a lantern inside the picture itself. As my husband pointed out, the light in this painting is cinematic. Like movie light, it's real and imaginary at the same time. Not long after my husband made this point to me, I read a small essay by John Berger called The Honesty of Goya, in which he writes this: "The light in his work is merciless for the simple reason that it shows up cruelty. Some of his drawings of the carnage of the disasters are like film shots of a flare-lit target after a bombing operation. The light floods the gaps in the same way. The light and space in Goya expose a story that we recognize because it works on our primal fears inside our own most vulnerable mortal bodies." Now, we're going to go back to Goya and his doctor. I want to try to unearth some of the complexities of painting, storytelling, and the body. So what do we have here? A self-portrait of Goya with a portrait of his doctor. The position of the two men makes a little story. Goya is sitting up in bed. With his left hand, he weakly clutches a sheet. Let's see, sorry. As Arietta offers him a glass of something to drink. For some reason, I think he hasn't already drunk the medicine or water, but is finding the strength to take it. For me, the invalid's face is the most wonderful part of this canvas, the picture's passionate thematic center. From it, we can see that he has suffered terribly. He may just now be sitting up after a dangerous bout of fever, which has drained him completely. His weak body can't sit upright without help. All this is written into his features and his posture, and constitute the familiar human narrative that makes the painting easy to read. But the doctor's face is something altogether different. When you look at the actual painting on the wall in Minneapolis, the man's oblique gaze is frankly a little weird. Can you see that here? Do you see he's kind of... It occurred to me that while I was examining it, that the real man may have been a little cross-eyed. And Goya, never one to avoid physiological truths in portraiture, painted the familiar face as it is, or was. The physician's gesture, his hand near the sick man's collar, the way he leans over his patient, appear to be both tender and necessary. But his eyes are deflected, and he isn't looking at his patient. He's doing his duty and doing it well, but there's something absent in him. It occurred to me that maybe he was just exhausted. The canvas is organized around rather broad planes. I find it interesting that the panel with the text on it isn't a flat color but highly irregular, a fact that marries it more closely to the modulations of the painting's foreground, the varying colors of the red-orange blanket modulated by its wrinkles in the light, the gray, greens, and whites on the sheet that move into Goya's robe and are repeated in his collar and cuffs, which contrast with the deep green of the doctor's jacket that is dark enough and brushed with black to disappear into the background beyond. The overall effect of the work is broad and simple, concentrating on the faces of the two men and the body of the patient. The background, however, is as solid and black and flat as anything could be. I walked backward and forward in the museum, looking at it from very close and very far away to distinguish any break or lessening in that color, but there was none. It resembles backgrounds Goya used in some of his portraits, a face against blackness. The elements of the picture are a doctor and his patient, an unseen piece of furniture on which the patient rests, and then emerging from the black background are these three people. Who are they? When I saw the painting in Minneapolis, I asked Evan Maurer, who runs the museum, and happens to be the brother of the husband of my husband's cousin, a connection that made that question possible. His answer was, nobody knows. Always an answer I like. In one book I looked at, the writer referred to these people as attendants at the sickbed. Well, sort of a reasonable thought. The person furthest to our left, well, to our left, that's right, is holding a chalice or a cup. And this led the art historian to surmise that this guy was a priest. Now, I think that's kind of strange. If these people were supposed to be attendants right behind the doctor's shoulder, they wouldn't look like muted shadows. Their coloring would be different. Okay, next slide. I think we should have one. It's okay. Oop. Okay, again, it's very tough to make connections without the real works, but nevertheless, even in this very broad thing, the palette used, actually, this is true, for the faces in the Arietta painting and for actually a number of the faces in the black paintings are quite similar. The style is different. The faces in the Arietta painting are more realistic. They aren't ghoulish. In fact, they seem to represent recognizable features of real individuals. But the color, the white, green, and browns of the figures in the foreground are connected. I mean, you don't see any gray greens here, I'm sorry, but they actually, I believe, truly are there. And more importantly, perhaps, because you can really see this, look how the space around the figures invades their bodies. If you see the head on this guy on the right, and the blackness actually really does seem to be coming into their bodies. Now go back to the Arietta. Oops. There. Okay. In the least visible figure in the Dr. Arietta canvas, far to our right, the person's features are dim and receding, similar to the technique Goya used in his fresco From Hell. Let's return to the painting's form as a whole. Should we be in any doubt that the patient nearly died, we need only to look at the text below, written into the painting itself as a distinct panel. The panel, as has been noted by others before me, mimics the form of an ex voto. The small paintings, or more rarely statues, believers donate to holy places as a token of thanks for a miraculous occurrence all through the Catholic world. A German scholar, Chris Rettenbach, outlined the elements needed in an ex voto. This is typical Germanic teaching because it's so obvious, but here they are. 1, the representation of the heavenly operative, divine being, saint, or holy place. 2, the figure who turns to the heavenly domain, in other words, the person with the problem, or the person saying thank you. Number 3, the event or condition that was the cause of the communication between the earthly person and the divine being. In other words, the event, the problem. And finally, the inscription that records condition, event, or hope. In Mexico, in Frida Kahlo's house, A number of you have probably been there too. I saw her collection of little ex-voto paintings done by ordinary people who were grateful to God or the Virgin or a saint for saving them from a terrible illness or from drowning or a car accident. The tradition goes on. Goya's painting has all the ingredients of an ex-voto turned into a secular offering. The miraculous operative, the doctor, the figure who turns to him for help, Goya, the event, terrible sickness, and the inscription that tells what happened. In this painting, however, the devotionary act, the giving of the work to the agent who did the miracle, is lifted out of the religious arena and placed in a fully human one. Arrieta would have read the gift through the lens of the ex-voto and known that he was being thanked for what Goya regarded as a miracle, his survival. Still, the figures in the background are unaccounted for, but the ex-voto form helps to give them a reason for being there. The recording of a miracle allows the presence, in fact, often demands the presence of the supernatural. And I think these ghostly figures are the dead. And that what we're looking at is a secular resurrection painting done as an ex-voto by a man who felt death in his body, almost touched it. A man who is literally being pulled forward out of the blackness, the world of the dead, and forward into the light of this world by his own will to live and his able physician. Of course, I can't prove that these people are dead. I could be wrong. But Goya's use of the ex-voto that traditionally depicts the supernatural made room, at least, for his own brand of that quality. Not God or saints or magic icons, but the visions and specters of the body in extremity. No matter how you look at it, those wraith-like figures don't make sense in terms of naturalistic conventions. Now I want to go back in time to another self-portrait. Among the etchings made by Goya during another period of recovery, you have to look for these guys. Los Caprichos, it's the very famous one. The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters is the last one, but you will find two other similar ones. One, if you look closely, has faces of Goya coming out of his head. Can you find that? And then there's one with a big empty white spot in it. Same picture. And then finally there should be the finished one that has no empty white spot. You got it? Can you see the one with the heads coming out? Yes, that's the one with the heads. Okay. All right, these prints were up for sale in February of 1799 and then quickly withdrawn, probably for political reasons, problems with the Inquisition. I was lucky enough to see a set of the 80 prints at the Norton Simon Museum in California a couple years ago. What became Plate 43 in the series was originally designed as the frontispiece of a series called Dreams. Do you have it? It's the one with the heads, the faces coming out of his head. The theories for why he might have put what number one, this was originally supposed to be number one, he turned it into 43. Lots of people have speculated why he did it. Mostly they come up with political reasons. So the final 43, which is there too, you see that over his bent head, a host of creatures, owls and bats, are flying out of his head, and beside him, there's an alert cat that some scholars have identified as a lynx. The early drawings for this plate are utterly fascinating. That's the one with the heads. A 1797 drawing includes faces. Above the sleeping author, a grotesque face that moves into three versions of the same face, his face. The pen lines that rise up from him are like emanations from his body. Can you guys see that? It's like there are these drawing lines that are going very forcefully out of his head, as if we are getting a glimpse into the mind asleep. Okay, the explanatory text for the final version from the Prado manuscript that was written by Goya reads, "Imagination abandoned by reason produces impossible monsters. United with her, she is the mother of the arts and the source of their wonders." Fair enough. This seems to be straight out of Enlightenment thinking. The emphasis on reason coupled with its opposite, unreason, madness, and hallucination. But it's clear that Goya's use of a form of that particular form, a set of satirical prints proposing a moral purpose, was also deeply personal. A much-quoted letter to Zapater in late 1792, at the onset of his illness, is worth quoting again. This is what he wrote. "I cannot live like that, with these problems always on my mind. It puts me in a bad humor until I put my hand below my navel. You laugh, but do the same. Do the same, and you will see the beneficial effect this has. And you really do need to, for the time for bad thoughts, bad words, and bad deeds has come. And my thanks to my Aunt Lorenzo, who has taught me this thing." To be frank, at first all that made me absent-minded, but now I fear neither witches, nor spirits, nor ghosts, nor any swaggering giants, nor cowards, nor brigands, nor any kind of body. I fear nothing and no one save humans. Famously difficult to parse, this letter suggests to me anyway a reference to masturbation as a cure for bad humor, but what Aunt Lorenza has to do with this is befuddling. The time for bad thoughts and bad words and bad deeds could refer to the political turmoil in Spain and to the terror in France, but could also be purely personal. The list Goya makes at the end is very interesting, however. Notice how witches, spirits, ghosts, swaggering giants, all fantastic, are listed in the same breath with cowards and brigands, which are not. Cowards and brigands might refer to other fictional figures, perhaps literary ones, that frightened him during his bad humors or delirium at the beginning of his illness. But these fictional bodies, he writes, no longer scare him. What scares him are real human bodies. The scholarly analyses of Los Caprichos are myriad, and I've only cracked the surface, reading only some works in English. These plates are both mysterious and ambiguous, and no single approach can possibly uncover all of their meanings. As a series, Los Caprichos has a narrative form but doesn't tell a single or unified story. Scholars have continually tried to discover patterns and themes revealed by the numbering. In numbers so-and-so, Goya ridicules the clergy and others the law or medicine, for example. They have identified certain plates as works with specific political targets, the queen perhaps, but no definitive shape has emerged from all this. I think a looser reading is possible, however. It may be so obvious that no one I've read has bothered to say it, but the original frontispiece ended up near the middle of the series, becoming number 43 out of 80, and it marks a change in the series from the more worldly, grounded caricature of the first 42 prints introduced by the profile of the author in number 1. We don't have it, but it's a very straight bust of him wearing a hat, peering at you sideways, that shows him clearly awake and glancing sideways with a knowing air to the phantasms and monsters of the final 37, which are introduced by the self-portrait of the author asleep. The second half also marks a new elevation in the pictures. 18 include images of flying, while only one in the first half, number 19, All Will Fall, has flying as a theme. As a whole, then, Los Caprichos forms two halves, a waking half and a sleeping half. I'm going to focus on the last 37, the nocturne, if you will, introduced by the figure of Goya asleep. The relation between the text and the pictures in these caprices is complex, and because I don't know Spanish, much of it remains beyond me. The work includes puns, word games, and conceits that won't translate into English. Number 79, which we also don't have, you don't look for it. For example, it's a word game. No One Has Seen Us, that's the name of it, employs images to make wordplay. In the front of this, there's a large barrel, and it's a picture of monks drinking wine, and the caption is, "No one has seen us." They're obviously getting drunk in secret. But the Spanish word for barrel, and there's a large barrel in the front of the picture, is boto, and the word devoto, as in devotees, the monks, makes a hidden sentence, which is devotos de la boto. This underscores, I did not obviously make this up, I took this from a book called Goya, The Last Carnival, where they're uncovering these kinds of conceits. This underscores the cleverness of these etchings and the pleasure it must have given people who notice such things. But it doesn't begin to speak to the power they have even on the uninitiated. The original frontispiece, in which Goya's face floats over his own head, proposes a look into his unconscious mind. The images that we think of as inside the head or mind are projected beyond its boundaries into the space above. Art, of course, is always a projection, a need to thrust outward and quite literally mark the world. Number 43 announces itself as a picture about the artist and art, which serves as an introduction to the content of what escapes him in the plates that follow. In those subsequent plates, the self-portrait has disappeared, but Goya presents us with many creatures and characters whose bodies are crossing boundaries. They excrete and spew material, as well as ingest and absorb it. Their physical borders are both vulnerable and subject to transformation. These plates show a continual interest in the body's orifices, the openings and passageways through which the outside enters and then comes out, those places where the thresholds between the world and the body are blurred. If you do a quick survey of gaping mouths in the plates that appear after 43, and there are many allusions to devouring, sucking, speaking, spitting, and vomiting, there are 19 images. Now, I think we have the next slide, 45. Oh my God. Well, I will tell you what it is. In the front, there are two old ladies. You see this? It's her open mouth and her teeth. And this woman over here has her finger like this. They're old crones, and she's taking, it looks like she's taking tobacco from here. In the foreground is this basket that is filled with either dead or still living infants that are just tossed into the basket. And since we can barely see the slide, it's good that we have Goya's commentary on it, which is this. The caption reads, "There is plenty to suck." Then the proto-manuscript says this: "Those who reach 80 suck little children. Those under 18 suck grown-ups. It seems that man is born and lives to have the substance sucked out of him." Goya's elaboration suggests that this plate treats the horrors of dependency by the young and the old, using nursing as its trope, another body opening that secretes milk. Notice the figure on our left and its gaping mouth. I tried to show it to you. The lines near it in the plate and the lips of the figure opposite. Okay, so it's very, very hard to see this, but we at least have the commentary. Okay, number 48. Let's go to the next slide and see if we, that's blow. Among your Xeroxes, we just keep it there, see if we can focus as much as possible. In the Xeroxes, there should be, okay. There should also be Talebearer's Blast of Wind. It's number 48. And what you can do, you just look for spew. There's a monstrous creature flying through the air, and out of his mouth are lines spewing what looks like vomit or something. Air, wind, vomit. Can you find it? You have it? Good. Okay. Number 48, Talebearer's Blast of Wind. The commentary reads like this: the tale-bearing witches are the most irritating in all witchcraft and the least intelligent in that art. If they really knew something, they wouldn't blast it about. Here a mouth blows wind as the listeners duck and cover their ears. But the image, coupled with its caption, suggests that this verbal wind resembles vomit or sputum. Compare the wind in 48 to number 69, blow. Okay, so this is it. This is blow, which features another orifice. This is pretty easy to see. Now the caption of this reads simply blow. Let's see. Although obvious in the caption, the commentary that Goya makes avoids all mention of the anus and instead returns to the mouth. This is what he says about this. No doubt there was a great catch of children the previous night. The banquet they are preparing will be a rich one. Bon appétit. Notice the words of the two, notice the mouths rather, of the two skeletal figures just behind the naked men. Whoops, they're not so easy to see at all. In the actual plate. The reference to cannibalism echoes the message in the plate on sucking. This child is having the substance sucked out of him, and the anal wind can't help but conjure another secretion, feces. From one page to another, the sardonic images and texts form a narrative of associations and repetitions, and the body parts most vulnerable to metamorphoses are the ones with openings. The preliminary drawings for number 57. Okay, look down in your sheets and you will see the drawing of a woman who has a head between her legs. There are, actually, let's see, I think, try the next print. See, I don't know if this is one of the drawings or the finished thing. I couldn't see. This is actually drawing number 2. This is not the finished plate, but it's certainly, this is pretty, you can see this pretty well. You also have this in your package, and you have one before it. This is number 57. It's called the filiation or the lineage. The first drawing shows a face with a huge phallic nose and a slit mouth like a vulva between the seated woman's legs. That's the kind of free drawing. It's simpler. It doesn't have the monocle. In the final one that now it turns out we don't have, there's a big monocle sticking up behind them. And instead of having this head really protruding, or this face protruding from between her legs, it's much more ambiguous. There's a face that does not have a huge nose. It's a man's face, sort of a little further to the side. And the caption for the earliest drawing that you have is, and it should be marked there, he puts her down as an hermaphrodite. In this one, the hermaphroditic reference is gone, and the scene has become more complex. This one refers to a masquerade. I think I wrote the actual reference on that particular piece of paper because I knew that we wouldn't have that. There are more people, a monocle has been introduced, but the sexual allusions to genitalia remain clear. This version, this one in front of you, includes a pubic hair beard. I mean, it's pretty wonderful and amazing. In the final version, the female genitalia with the nose phallus has been muted by a new face mask that still rests between her legs, but not so obviously as before. The dog mask that actually covers her face, however, has remained, as has the phallic nose on the fellow who gains a monocle in the second version. You see his big nose. Together, these three pictures create a story of artistic concealment. You just have to believe me that in the final version, the nose on the guy does not look like a phallus, and his mouth does not look like a vagina. Which, interestingly enough, is also the message of the etching in its final form. That is, the explanatory note reads, "And who is she?" It's about deceiving the parents of the fiancé. No doubt some self-censorship was involved in this, a process which may have applied to some of the other plates that we don't have preliminary drawings for. But what is most striking is that we have revolving body parts, head as genital, genital as head. Let's say I'm right. Number 43 begins a second wave in the fragmented story of Los Caprichos. This second wave is introduced by a second self-portrait. Early drawings of this work include the image of the author's own face being released over his head. In the final version, these faces are replaced by animals, owls and bats. After this second self-portrait in the series, the fantastic bodies we are shown in one plate after another include multiple versions of these same owls and bats. Flying becomes a visual trope for what the artist produces. Like Zeus, he gives birth from his head, and that spawning, an inversion of real vaginal birth, brings about a host of corporeal transformations. Phallic metamorphoses are everywhere. Let's see if we have the next one. No, but this is good enough. This is obviously the broom functions as a kind of sexual organ. Let's see, maybe we have the, oh no, you have it in your Xerox. Well, here again. Well, actually, hold it on this, and if you see in your things, you'll see this very strange thing that says, what one does to one another is the caption, and in the foreground, it looks like this sort of phallic penis with legs walking along. You see that? No? Yeah? Okay, I'm not dwelling deeply. You get the point. And I also think I might have taken out 58. Do we have that? Or, no, maybe we have it here. Let's see. No, go back. Go back. Yeah, we'll stick with the guys with the heads. No, sorry. No, keep going. Go back to the donkeys. Right. That's fine. You get to see them again. It's all right. And one more. There we go. Okay. Now, you're going to have to believe me again. All you have to do is pick up, one of those nice little edition of Los Caprichos and look through, after 43 and look around. But you will see that several times, as in plate 57, the genital area of the monster or being in question is occupied by a head, often an animal head. Okay, there's one example. In in 48, it's a cat's head, which is also, if you remember, on the frontispiece itself. And in 65, which is, go to the next one, I'm afraid. Is there any way we can focus a little more? Okay. It's an owl. Or is it a cat? It's an owl. Yes, this is the owl. There is another cat in one of them. But here's the owl. You see how these heads keep popping out of these areas of the body. So we have the engendering head in 43 and the engendering phallus. Creative and energy and sexual energy are bound up in each other. The play with penises and noses, vaginas and mouths was certainly not invented by Goya, nor was the idea that the artist combines both sexes, penetrating phallic male and birthing women. In Goya, the phallic head, indeed all those heads peeking out between the legs of his creatures, as well as the hermaphroditic face between the masked woman's legs, have an obvious natural source. Heads appear between the legs of women when they give birth, an ordinary miracle that is also, frankly, rather violent and bloody. Even those of us who have done it are amazed by it. In birth, the borders between one person and another are truly confused. The inside becomes the outside, and a new being passes across the threshold of the body. Birth recurs as a hidden narrative in Los Caprichos, often distorted and monstrous, but recapitulated again and again. The frightening production announced in plate 43, the sleep of reason produces monsters. The best thing I've ever read on Goya remains Baudelaire. The poet may have only seen Los Caprichos because that work had been shown in France. He ends his few pages on the artist with these words. Now we can go all the way to the last, which is a pretty terrible slide, but that's it. It's called Bon Voyage, and it's truly a remarkable thing when you can see the actual the actual plate. This is Baudelaire. Goya's great merit consists in his having created a credible form of the monstrous. His monsters are born viable, harmonious. No one has ventured further than he in the direction of the possible absurd. All those distortions, all those bestial faces, those diabolical grimaces of his are impregnated with humanity. Even from the special viewpoint of natural history, it would be hard to condemn them. So great is the analogy and harmony between all parts of their being. In a word, the line of suture, the point of juncture between the real and the fantastic, is impossible to grasp. It is a vague frontier which not even the subtlest analyst could trace. Such is the extent to which the transcendent and the natural concur in his art. What a guy. The line of suture. My argument overlaps with Baudelaire's. It is exactly Goya's first fierce humanity that stirs us, both in his self-portrait with Dr. Arietta, in which we recognize the story of our own physical frailty, our permanent proximity to death, and in Los Caprichos, where life is a mad dance with that inevitable death, lived in bodies that will age and wrinkle into corpses if we're lucky, and not struck down by sickness or accident first. What is interesting about Los Caprichos, and indeed the black paintings too, is that this work is both repellent and attractive. Goya's portraits of greed and lust have a furious energy that is ultimately seductive. We want to look at them. His monsters and cannibals take wing inside us and become our own escaping dreams, fantasies, and wishes. But this is only possible because the artist taps the deepest fears, joys, and taboos that pertain to our all too human bodies. This is Goya's narrative in the body, secular, brutal, gorgeous. It's also the story David, great painter that he was, evaded and suppressed with such skill. We are, all of us, trapped in our mortal bodies, and yet the world passes through us all of our lives in many forms. We take in food and drink and expel it. We couple sexually and give birth. But words and pictures also enter us and come out again transformed. A long time ago, when my husband, Paul Auster, was just a kid, 20, he jotted something in his notebook that turns out to articulate the drama of Goya's work pretty well. This is what he wrote. The world is in my head, my body is in the world. Years later, my brother-in-law, the artist John Kessler, collaborated with my husband and another artist, Christopher Wool, and made a word box with this text slowly revolving inside it. The world in Goya's head was immense, and we are very lucky that his body was in the world and that it left its mark on paper and walls, canvases and plates that still shake us with their vigor, their truth, and above all, their life. Thanks.